I'd like to talk about the research I've been doing up in the bonny banks of Loch Lomond. It's always sunny up there as well, as you all know. Just a very summary, we did a rapid walkover survey of targeted areas in Arrochar, and we revealed 88 new sites belonging to a busy rural community. And over 2 seasons, we excavated a couple of 17th century structures and a 17th century store or lookout on the shores of Loch Lomond. So the origin of this project actually lies back in 2011, when I first joined Fiona Jackson and Sue Furness on the High Morlagan project near the village of Arrochar. I then helped Sue and Fiona to develop another project called the Hidden Heritage Project, which surveyed the isthmus between Loch Lomond and Loch Long. And despite all that, we still continue to collaborate. 2 visitors from the USA, Peter and Karen Macfarlane, volunteered on this project, and they were really inspired by what was going on and wanted to do some more work on the Arrochar parish, because that was their traditional clan lands. There are now Macfarlanes spread all over the world. Some left Scotland in the 17th century and have ended up in the USA, and they've got great pride in their Scottish American heritage. 2 distant relatives, Peter and Preston Macfarlane, spelt differently, in particular have been instrumental in setting up this project and securing funding from their clan members who want to connect with their ancestors, and they want to capture a sense of being there. They are therefore interested in anything to do with the Arrochar parish. The clan descends from the Earls of Lennox and received a charter for the lands of Arrochar in the 13th century. Please come in, yes. Make yourself comfortable. The MacLan Macfarlane name came into being in the 14th century after Parlin, a supporter of Robert the Bruce. The history of the clan is riven with battles, skirmishes and bloody feuds, which is no surprise, as loyal supporters of the Earls of Lennox, and they fought against generally the Campbells and the Cahoons. The 16th century was quite difficult for them. They fought against Mary Queen of Scots at the Battle of Langside, were involved in the murder of Humphrey Cahoon of Luss, and the Battle of Glenfruin, they helped to murder about 80 of the clan Cahoons. So they were a pretty robust lot. Accused of theft, murder and tyranny, just general, everyday things in those days. The 17th century was a little better for them, although Inveruglas Castle was burned by Cromwell's soldiers. But they eventually made peace with the Campbells through intermarriage, so they were able to keep the peace. But one of the high points of the Macfarlane history was in the 18th century, when the chief, Walter Macfarlane, became famous for his scholarship rather than as a fighter. He inherited a rather impoverished estate, and he attempted to bring it back into its former glory. Late in life, he inherited money from his younger brother, who had been a sugar planter in Jamaica. When Walter died, the clan chief overstretched themselves financially and went bankrupt, and they sold the estate in 1784. And currently the clan has no chief. The last one died without children. So on the left we have the Clan Macfarlane coat of arms, as it was in the 17th century. Loch Sloy being their rallying cry. Unfortunately, Loch Sloy is now a reservoir for a hydroelectric dam, so any sites that would have been surrounded that are now underwater. So a drought is quite good in that sense, possibly, not in any other ways. On the right is the present parish of Arrochar at the top end of Loch Lomond. It was originally part of the Luss parish, but got separated in the 17th century. And you can spot, I don't know if you can see there, but Arrochar is crossed sort of east to west by other glens, including Glen Douglas in the south, the isthmus between Loch Lomond and Loch Long, then Inveruglas Water, and then at the top you've got Strathdu Uisci in the north. So you can see that the Macfarlanes were surrounded by powerful clans from whom they often had conflict. So Peter and Preston Macfarlane offered to commission a detailed survey of the whole parish, which I was quite happy to take on board, but realised it would take a lifetime. So we agreed on a compromise of 15 days. hoping I'd live a bit longer than that. So before I head into the hills, I consulted the historic maps, and we're very lucky to have a couple of Pont maps of the late 16th century. We discovered an Edgar map in 1745, which wasn't on the National Library of Scotland webpage. Then we have Roy and, of course, the first edition maps. So from that produced quite a few potential 16th or 17th century place names. And the documentary research has been helped immensely by the antiquarian Walter Macfarlane's collection of papers, which are now in the Hill collection. And these go back to the 14th century. And it has been used by one of the few papers written on the Macfarlanes this century, called Barbarous and Yet Mixed with Some Show of Civility. I think is quite a nice title for that. That's D.J. Johnson Smith's master's paper and his map on the right. So the Hill collection now is in the Procurator Fiscal Library in Glasgow. Amazingly, it's kept in an old iron chest, which you can see at the top there. And there's us looking through the papers, which include property sales, inheritance and other activities of the clan chiefs. Unfortunately, they're written in either Latin or secretary hand, so it really does require somebody skilled in archiving and these techniques to really draw out as much as possible from these papers, but that's a huge potential there for someone. We've also been lucky to have involvement of a local retired librarian, Alistair McIntyre, who has extensively researched many of these settlements in the vicinity of his home, and here he is digging on High Moor Lagan. And on the left is just a list of some of the sources he used. He's a bit like an Exocet missile. You just have to sort of aim him onto a settlement and he will then research it to pieces. It's amazing. You just got to set him off and he brings back all this amazing information. Also, what I would do is look at the aerial photographs. And this particular webpage is very useful, the side-by-side, where you can zoom in, find remains, and you can check it on the map on the left, and then you can actually get the grid reference, which you can then take out into the field and check whether it is real or not. There were a few sites on Canmore already, but not very many, and generally along the loch side, unsurprisingly, but also where there had been a recent overhead power line put in, so obviously there's been a wee commercial project there, but really very little on Canmore before we started. So armed with these maps and photographs and the list of potential sites, we recruited local volunteers, students and members of the Association of Certificated Field Archaeologists to undertake a targeted rapid walkover survey in the spring of 2016. By rapid walkover survey, I mean we strolled across the landscape and then we found sites, we would take photographs, draw sketch plans with dimensions, write a brief description, record the grid reference with a handheld GPS, and then we'd move on. That was it. It's certainly not an inch-by-inch coverage of the landscape, as I wanted to get a flavour of really what was there. So we also concentrated on the more accessible loch side and straths. And in total, we found 88 new sites, well, most of which are new to the archaeological record. And these included single shielings or groups of shielings, single houses, barns or byres, farmsteads, several sheep folds and pens, corn drying kilns, a possible whisky still, ruined bridges, remnants of the old military way, and also a possible hunting lodge associated with a story about mischievous Duncan and the burning of the Athol men. So as an example, Glen Douglas was one of the areas we surveyed, in which there were 37 sites that we found. And this clearly represents a much denser population than there is now. This forms the southern boundary of the Arrochar parish, and my eye was drawn to that funny blip that you see going up Tulloch Hill, which I thought was a bit odd. Rona Macfarlane did some research, and she discovered that there had been a farm there called Tullochintall, which was owned by the Cahoons back in the 16th century. So we reckon when the parish boundary was being fixed in the 17th century, there was some kind of land agreement between them that was sort of just reduce this clan feuding. It was a kind of land decision. We'll let you have that. We'll keep this in our parish, and let's call it a day. In this glen, there were two farmsteads of particular interest. This one was surrounded by forestry. It was not shown on the first edition map, so initially we had no idea of what its name was. And we chose this to do a survey, and this is a hand-drawn, taped-off survey by members of ACFA, and I think it's delightful. There are clearly two main groups of structures on either side of the stream, each consisting of a house and a barn, with enclosures and an area of lazy beds. The structures are rectangular in shape with square corners, which to me suggests that they are late 18th or early 19th century in date. The second site was in more open ground and consisted of at least 3 rectangular structures, a large square kail yard in the top left there, a circular kiln and a knocking stone. For those who aren't sure what a knocking stone is, it's something you dip your fingers in when you're hot. No, it's a large stone for preparing your porridge. You kind of put your grain in, mix it with, and you pound it. Prepare your porridge in the mornings. So using Edgar's map, we were able to identify several settlements along the north side of the strath. And this revealed a couple of likely place names. Two of which you can see there, Gartenfern and Kreutner. And I do apologise for my pronunciation. I was brought up in Reading, what can you say? I do my best. So we have 2 possible place names. And these were confirmed by a rental of 1784, which you can see there, Glen Douglas. There's names listed from west to east, and we have Gartenferd and Gritnine again written down there. So we have 2 potential names. So I set Alistair McIntyre off. I said, find me stuff about Kreutnine and Gritnine, and he did that. So we have a timeline. The earliest he got back was 1643, and the latest was 1841. There's no mention. So 1810 is the last birth recorded at this site. It also mentions in 1708, you can see there's two families living in the 2 parts of the town. So that nicely confirms this sort of 2 sides of the stream idea that you get from the survey. So we don't know at this point whether these tenants were evicted or whether they just had their leases ended, but certainly by the mid-19th century they were abandoned. So that's something we can research into. However, looking back, though the structures visible there are probably 18th, 19th century, there's a great potential for them to be medieval in date. So I think that's great interest. And neither of these 2 sites have had any, currently have had any agriculture or forestry on them, so they're kind of late untouched and huge potential for further work. Another site I'd like to look at is Camisnaclash, which is on the far east side. I can waste a few seconds. I'll not waste. This is it as it was in 1745. By 1777, the place name has become Mullincambus, which suggests that it's a mill. And a small loch is, you can see it slightly to the left up the hill. By the first edition, it's quite substantial. You've got 5 roof structures and a water channel coming down from the fairy loch on the left there. This is what it looks like today. Stones and boulders are strewn all over the place, and it really looks like it's been actually demolished. But we could only just about detect a rectangular structure in the remains, although the water, the lade was quite substantial. So Peter and Preston asked, well, is this a grain mill or is this a sawmill? Because it's actually located within what is possibly ancient woodland, as you can see there. And so I looked into that further and found that there was a mention of the clap and happer of the said mill of Camisnaclash in 1736. So this might be an unfamiliar phrase nowadays, it certainly was to me, but it must have been well known in the 18th century because it's included in a poem by Robert Burns, which I shall let you read in your heads. So when I looked up the meaning of clap and happer, I found that it meant, yes, the clap is the mill clapper was the mechanism that shook the shoe of the mill to make sure there was a steady flow of grain going into the millstones. It was usually made out of a piece of wood and it made a loud clapping sound. The happer is clearly the hopper, which contained the grain. So So this would suggest that it was primarily a grain mill in use by the mid-18th century, perhaps presumably for the people who lived in Glen Douglas just up the road. But however, it's quite common for a sawmill to be added to grain mills. You know, there's more than one purpose for these mills once you get going. So it's could quite possibly have served more than one purpose. So we've been able to carry out 2 excavations, one on Tarbert Isle. This is a tree-covered island, only 40 metres long, probably the smallest island I've ever excavated on. And it's depicted by Pont with a castle on top, so we were very curious about that, so we wanted to excavate and find out what was there. We excavated over 10 days and found a trapezoidal-shaped structure, which I think Fiona Baker had actually recognised before, but we could have revealed its extent. Strange shaped one, about 13 metres long. We found several sherds of 17th century pottery, a mid-17th century coin, a 14th or 15th century jug handle, and a 19th century clay pipe bowl. So we concluded that the building had probably been used as a lookout or a store during the disturbances of the 17th century, enabling the Macfarlanes to control access along the loch. And there was absolutely no evidence for this being a castle. And I think Ponce got confused with Inveruglus, which is just a bit further north. The second excavation was at Craigerport. My attention was drawn to this by a documentary reference to the clan chief John Macfarlane building an almshouse at Craigerport during the reign of James VI, which would place it in the 17th century. Apparently, there were wall tracks of a house that could still be seen in the 19th century, but after that, it sort of disappeared. So we specifically targeted this area, which the place name was still known, and we were lucky to find this very low foundations here, so you can see there on the right-hand side being marked out by people there, a small rectangular structure. Unfortunately, it was being used by campers for their barbecues, so it was a bit covered in rubbish, but we managed to clear that first. And again, when we found it, we found a trapezoidal-shaped structure. There was a sandy floor and fragments of perforated roof slates. There was no clear entrance or fireplace or hearth, no mortar, and no suggestion of sandstones or anything. So it's not a big substantial structure. It's fairly small. I think not having any charcoal or fireplace is a bit unusual, and to me suggests that maybe it was a two-story structure. With so the fireplace would have been on the first floor, perhaps with an external wooden stair up to the top. The ground floor could have been used just for storage. And again, we found one broken sherd of 17th century pottery and a single sherd of green glass, which initially I was rather perturbed about, but then Helen Spencer has confirmed that it's 16th or early 17th century window glass. So again, that fits in really nicely with our date. I was very pleased with that. So though we have no direct evidence that this is an almshouse, it's of the right place, it's of the right date, and it's potentially of relatively high status to have a window to have glass in your windows. So moving on swiftly, I wanted just to highlight, this idea of refuge and the word spittle. There's a place map that Edgar shows the Spittle of Inveran. So we have spittle and almshouses. Derek did a study of almshouses in Scotland, and there were none shown in the west coast of Scotland. So I think there's obviously great potential, and obviously you should get more money to do another project. So move on from that. So the last deal briefly with the principal homes of the Macfarlanes. The two main ones, Inveruglus Castle and Isla Navau. Inveruglus was burnt in the 17th century by Cromwell's troops. Isla Navau was in ruins by 1814. However, there's a smaller structure, Clattoch Moor, which was a modest house. So the chiefs didn't always live in big castles; they roamed around. And so this smaller structure, we tried to find during our Hidden Heritage project. Unfortunately, we dug up this woman's garden and only found the garden path. So it's still to be discovered. So another house in Inverrioch, New Tarbert. Again, that's now possibly part of the Claymore Hotel. But this other one, Ardleash, has been suggested by one historian. So I've been trying to follow that up and see if we can get some idea about where that might have been. And looking at our maps, we can see that Ardleash itself appears in Edgar's map on the right there, and also in all the subsequent maps as quite a significant farm. So that has potential. However, if you look at the very top on the first map, in the left here, Pont's map, he has an island, I don't know how to pronounce this, Ylunlich, with a dwelling, he says. It's got a dwelling on it. So in the late 16th century, there's an island with a dwelling at the very top. If you look down to Roy's map on the right, it has now become a promontory. I think the island has become joined to the shore, and it's called Island Illich, even though it's a promontory. So this is Ardleash as it is today, with a modern, fairly modern cottage and some roofed structures. But further round the shore, you can see there are other structures in the vicinity, and you could just see the promontory on the top there coming between Ardleash and the shore there. So we have a promontory settlement here on the top of the loch, which I think is a very significant location and very worth looking into. So Ylunlich, or Island Illich, we are going to excavate this September. We have money from the Macfarlanes to excavate that, so that's very exciting news. So in conclusion, I hope I've given you a flavour of the amazing potential that there is for uncovering archaeological sites in Arrochar, and to show that it's also been very much a team effort. You know, I said it's not all by myself. A team effort to bring together historical record and the maps and bring it all together within the field. In a relatively short space of time, we found 88 new sites, which is a range of activities, say whisky stills and hunting lodges. And we've confirmed through excavation at least 2 structures to be of 17th century date, which in itself is quite good, because normally they tend to be 18th, 19th century. So gradually we are revealing fascinating elements of the Macfarlane landscape. So I'd like to thank all the local volunteers and students. You might be able to spot yourselves there, you're all there somewhere. And members of AGFA who came along and helped me. I'm very grateful to you all, and to Northlight Heritage for their assistance. And finally to Clan Macfarlane for helping to funding this project. I thank them all. Thank you.